Welcome to Mind Over Money from 10-Minute Money Mindset. This week, The Pulse covered the Meta layoffs, 8,000 people, record profits, a memo that arrived on a Thursday. Today, we look at the psychological side of that story, not what happened, why most people did not see it coming. Even when the warning was delivered publicly, in January in the CEO's own words, and what that bias is doing to your financial life right now. Let us get into it. On January 29, 2026, Mark Zuckerberg sat in front of a room full of analysts and investors and said something remarkable. He said 2026 would be the year that AI starts to dramatically change the way that we work. He said the company was already seeing projects that used to require big teams accomplished by a single, very talented person. This was not a private conversation. It was a public earnings call. It was reported by every major financial outlet the following morning. Millions of people read the headline. 89 days later, 8,000 Meta employees received a memo telling them May 20th was their last day. You are listening to Mind Over Money from 10-Minute Money Mindset. Every Friday, we look at the psychology underneath the week's financial story. The invisible patterns that explain why smart people make decisions that do not match what they know. This week's story is about a bias called normalcy bias. You have probably never heard that phrase, but you have definitely felt it, and there is a strong chance it is shaping your financial life right now without your awareness. Here is how normalcy bias works. When human beings receive information about a potential threat, the brain does something counterintuitive. It does not immediately model the threat. It first filters the information through a question it asks unconsciously. Has something like this happened before in my direct experience? If the answer is no, the brain underweights the threat. It does not dismiss it entirely. It just assigns it a lower probability than the evidence warrants. And then it gets back to the normal schedule. Disaster researchers have studied this pattern for decades. It explains why people do not evacuate before hurricanes, even when officials have issued mandatory orders. The hurricane exists as a data point. The lived experience of their neighborhood flooding does not. So the brain resolves the conflict by concluding this particular hurricane is probably not the one that does it. This is not stupidity. It is architecture. The brain evolved to save energy. Running threat simulations for every warning it receives would be cognitively exhausting, so it filters. And the filter has a flaw. Now apply that to the 8,000 people who got the memo on April the 23rd. Zuckerberg said the words in January. The reporters wrote them down, the articles appeared, the tweets went out, and the people sitting inside Meta's offices across 90 cities around the world read those headlines and performed the same unconscious calculation. He said that. But layoffs have been announced before and my team was fine. He is describing a general direction, not a specific plan. My manager would have told me if this applied to our department. This is not the one. That is normalcy bias, not carelessness, not arrogance, architecture. And here is the financial dimension that makes it so costly. Behavioral economists have documented a pattern they call income anchoring. It is the tendency of individuals to treat their current income not as a variable, but as a baseline, a constant. The stable floor on which all other financial decisions are built. You sign the mortgage against the income, you lease the car against the income, you set the monthly savings rate against the income, you build the lifestyle against the income. None of those decisions factor in a meaningful probability that the income disappears, because the brain has already filed that outcome under unlikely based on the normalcy filter and moved on. The income feels like an asset. It is not an asset. It is a stream, and streams change course. She was not wrong about the edge cases. She was wrong about the math. AI does not need to be perfect to eliminate a role. It needs to be accurate enough that the cost of the remaining human errors is lower than the cost of the humans themselves. Here is the part that behavioral researchers say compounds the damage. A layoff is a financial event, but it is also an identity event. And the identity damage often costs more than the income gap. When your sense of professional worth is bound to a title, a company, a role, the loss of that role is not just a paycheck problem, it is a self-definition problem. Research from psychologists studying unemployment consistently shows that people who closely identified with their job title take significantly longer to re-engage in a job search than people who held their professional identity more loosely. You spend weeks processing what happened before you spend energy on what comes next. And those weeks are expensive, financially, not just emotionally. This is why a layoff hits twice, once in the bank account, once in the mirror. So what do you do with this? The behavioral answer is not to assume the worst, it is not to live in a state of perpetual career anxiety. That is not useful and it is not accurate. Most people reading these headlines will keep their jobs. AI will displace some roles and create others. The future is genuinely uncertain. The behavioral answer is to update the model. Here is a specific framework. Think of your income as a stream, not a reservoir. A reservoir holds a fixed amount of water that exists whether or not the source continues. A stream depends entirely on the conditions upstream. When you think of income as a reservoir, you make financial decisions as if the supply is guaranteed. You optimize for lifestyle, not resilience. You build commitments that are hard to reverse. You treat the stream as permanent because it has been flowing for years. When you think of income as a stream, you ask different questions. If this stream shifted, what would my financial life look like in 90 days? In 6 months, what is the smallest version of my monthly commitments that would still be livable? How many months of stream am I storing? None of this requires panic. It requires precision. This is the question the 900,000 tech workers who lost their jobs since 2020 did not have a clean answer to when the memo arrived. Not because they were financially irresponsible, because the normalcy filter had done its job. There is one more layer to this that is worth naming. OpenAI CEO Sam Altman recently observed that many companies may be using the language of AI to frame workforce reductions they would have made for other reasons. He called it AI washing. That observation matters here, but not in the way you might think. Whether the specific cause is genuine AI displacement or AI washing or some combination of both does not change the individual's exposure. If your role exists at the intersection of volume, repeatability, and documentation, it is inside the zone of displacement regardless of the justification your employer uses. Content review, customer support, software testing, certain categories of analysis. The specific technology involved is secondary to the underlying economic logic. And the underlying economic logic has not changed since the Industrial Revolution. If a machine can do it more cheaply at acceptable quality, the machine eventually does it. The question is not whether you believe your role is safe. The question is whether your financial structure is resilient enough that you have time and space to adapt if it turns out you were wrong about that. That is the financial instrument no one talks about. Not the investment account, not the salary, the runway, the number of months your life continues without the stream. Most financial conversations treat runway as a nice to have. The behavioral evidence from this week's story suggests it is the load-bearing structure. The thing you discover was holding everything up only after it is no longer there. The takeaway is not dramatic. It is not quit your job or assume the worst. It is this: your income is not permanent. Your brain thinks it is. Those two facts have financial consequences. Knowing the name of the bias does not inoculate you against it, but it does let you examine the assumptions you are living on without having been asked whether you agreed to them. This Monday on The Pulse, the week's most important financial story. Reported straight. No frameworks, no solutions. Just the truth of what is happening and why it matters. Subscribe so you do not miss it.